Hello and welcome to How Would You Rate Your Pain? We will be exploring life, loss, love, and the power of resilience. I am Dr. Tiffany Bartell. Thank you for listening, and I can't wait to go on this journey with you. Hello and welcome to another episode of How Would You Rate Your Pain, the podcast that explores life, loss, love, and the power of resilience. I am Dr. Tiffany Bartell, a licensed therapist and your host. Today we will be talking about grief and trauma, and so I do want to issue a trigger warning that we will be talking about some scenes of death and some descriptions of violence and trauma. If the subjects of trauma, death, or grief are triggering to you, please feel free to sit this one out, and we'll see you next time. I want you each to be so gentle with yourselves. So we have in the studio one of the most remarkable women I know. I can't remember the last time I texted or called Renita and she wasn't doing three things at once. I was actually talking right before we started when I called her to talk about, prepping for the show today. I think you just fed the homeless dinner and you were driving on the way to a meeting and you were talking to me on that very short drive, and you're the ultimate juggler. You don't wear a cape, but I think it's because you don't need one.
No.
And I think everybody knows that you're a superhero. So, and I stand by everything I said, and I know that praise makes you uncomfortable. So
well, you are too sweet. Yes, you're too sweet.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, my name is Renita. I have an undergrad in social work and a master's in school counseling. I work in higher education, and I devote my life to helping people survive college. And yes, I do a lot of things on the side, helping with a few different charities. I'm active at church, and I have 3 grown boys. And that's about me.
Very tall grown boys.
Very tall grown boys.
Yeah.
Very proud of them. Yes.
As you should be. Yeah. I think if I was going to kind of say what you do for a living in your on and off time, it'd just be helping people.
Yes.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about the grief of losing a parent in a very specific and difficult way, but grief and loss are subjects that are ones most of us have come in contact with. I think it's important to point out that there are many kinds of circumstances that cause us to go through the grieving process, and there's also very individual ways that each of us go through that process and experience it. I'm so grateful that Renita's here to tell us a bit about your experience of losing your dad and the process of working through it and what that was for you. So to start off, tell me a little bit about your relationship with your father.
So my childhood was a little on the unique side. My mom was married to who I thought was my dad, and I soon found out that I actually had a different dad, and that story goes, I was home one day, I was 7, I answered the telephone, and the man on the phone asked for my mom, and so she was on the phone, out of the room, and comes back in and says, "Hey, your dad's on the phone, and he would like to talk to you." And I had answered, and like any 7-year-old, I was like, that's not my dad. And she said, "No, your real dad is on the phone." Mm-hmm. So that's when I found out you could have a real dad and a different kind of dad. And so the man who I thought was my dad had raised me from birth. I had his last name. I did not know any different. But now all of a sudden I'm not Renita from small town Kentucky. Now I happen to be Colombian as well.
Wow.
And I'm Hispanic and, and all of that. And so from that time, in the next couple of years, my mom's marriage fell apart and she moved us to Florida. But I was using my vacations and my summers going and visiting relatives I didn't know and getting to know my real dad, who was a businessman in Medellin, Colombia. I I met my stepmother and step siblings and all of that.
Wow.
So it was a unique, because now instead of 2 families, I had 3 families.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so learning, how to maneuver that, what does that look like? Because nobody else's family looked like that.
Yeah.
And so, once we moved to Florida, things were tough. My mom was a single parent, and all I knew is that my biological father was able to provide for us, and when he felt like it. And so that was, that was kind of different. And so my mom, had the struggle of when I would be away in Colombia or in Miami or wherever I was with relatives, I had maids and drivers and guards.
Wow. So
and
different.
such a different life. And so like at home you did your own laundry, you cooked your own food if you wanted to eat, and life was different. And my mom would have to snap me back into reality. She's like, I do not have a maid here, you will clean up. And so but I am grateful because I feel blessed and enriched that I had different opportunities.
Absolutely. That's a lot of context switching, though. Did you speak Spanish before you met your dad?
No, I did not speak Spanish. Small town Kentucky.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
So I tell people I speak Spanish now. It's not perfect because my mom was American, and so I wasn't speaking it here. I was only speaking it on vacation, and
very conversational.
Yes. Yeah.
What a learning curve. A different culture, a different country. Just even getting there,
right.
Learning how to take flights internationally as a child.
And different values as well.
Yeah.
You have your culture, but you also have your values and your ethics, because my father's family was a completely different religion than where I was being raised. And so it was
everything was different.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. You just, you're one person when you're with one parent, and you're a different person when you're with a different parent. So it was challenging at times, but again, I feel blessed because I did get to experience a lot of things.
Yeah. It's interesting, Renita. I've always noticed that it's very easy for you to connect with people and relate to them. And, just even building that flexibility in as, a child, kind of gave you that agility and flexibility, but that's also a lot to go through. Yeah. So, as you feel comfortable, only what you want to share, tell us what happened to your dad.
Okay. So I like to start here. So it was my senior year in high school, and it was spring break. A few of my senior classmates, we had taken a trip for spring break to England.
So fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that was fun. And so we went to England. I had just come back to the United States. I was going to a boarding school. And so I was at home for a day to sleep off jet lag before going back to school. And so I come in one day, and that night my father had called from Colombia saying my abuelita, my grandmother, and my tia had been in an accident, and they were not expecting my abuelita to live. And so he was asking me to come over so that I would be there for the funeral. So one day I'm flying in from England. The next day I'm getting on a plane and going to Colombia to be with the family.
Yeah.
And shortly after I arrived, she did pass. She did pass away from her injuries. She was, I want to say abuelita, she was probably 88. Okay. So she was a lot older. And I had never experienced death. I had never been to a funeral, really.
Wow.
I maybe had like some super extended relatives die that really didn't affect my life. So whether it was here in the States or over there, I hadn't experienced it, so I didn't know what to expect. And this was a big introduction into how they grieve, how they do. My family is Catholic over in Colombia, and so how they have different masses. And here in the United States, we embalm. Over there, they were not embalming. They may now, but this was 89. This was 1989. So I can remember hordes of people wanting to come through for the viewing, and I just remember like we were having to put special perfume on my abuelita because she would start to smell.
Wow.
It was so hot, and it's very muggy and moist, very humid down there. And so I remember like all of these different memories and smells and sounds, and I was 17 at the time. So once the day or two of viewings had taken place, then there was the huge cathedral mass that they did, service that they put on, and I can just remember, wow, like, hundreds of people were there, and people had come in from all over the world.
So she was very well loved.
She was very well loved. She was the matriarch. There, were 9 children. She had 9 children.
Oh, wow.
And then, of course, all the other extended family besides her own family. So, Abuelita Esther was very loved. And so it was unique and interesting for me to look around and see how people were reacting and reciting rosaries and all of that, all of the things. And then when we went to the cemetery, well, turns out our family has their own mausoleum. And so, instead of burying in the ground, which I thought everyone was buried in the ground at that time, but no, you can be slid into a building, and a mausoleum. They put you into a vault, I guess is what it's called. And so that was different. And I remember my grandfather had died when my father was a baby. So he had been gone for 40 plus years. So they had taken his remains and put them with my abuelita so that they could be buried together. And
so many layers of unexpected in this situation.
Like, oh, we do this, and oh, what? That's how it's done. Like, it was a huge learning curve. And so once the burial was done, they have a 9-day mass called a novena. And it's in honor of the person that has died, and you gather in a home that can hold everybody that comes. So we started having these daily masses in my grandmother's home in Medellin. And the priest, who was a relative, of course, we have lots of priests in our family. And so one of our priests would do the mass every night. And I remember on the 3rd night, my dad was there, and tons of relatives, and as they trickled home, like after the mass was done and everybody was starting to go home, it was time to go to bed. Like, I had a lot of things going on in my head, like, how much longer am I here? I'm missing a lot of school.
Your senior
this
year.
Is my senior year. I need to get back to the U.S. and finish. And so, like, a lot of things, like, how much longer do I stay? And my father and I, we had a big fight that night. We were disagreeing. We tend to be oil and water anyway, and so it was not uncommon for us to disagree and not see eye to eye. And I am very strong-willed.
Yes, you are.
And I speak my mind.
I like it.
I definitely speak my mind, and culturally, that's not necessarily acceptable. And with him being the male, you listen to the male. And that's not how I was raised. Yeah. And so my mom she's super independent. And so that's how I was raised, to let your voice be heard, and
stand up for yourself.
Yeah, stand up for yourself, for sure. And so anyway, we did not see eye to eye that night. He got very angry. I was very angry, and so he left. He left to go home. The next day, I was getting ready. I was in the bathroom, had my shower. I was brushing my teeth. And I'm hearing a lot of commotion and a lot of chaos in the house. And my uncle comes, bursting into the bathroom, and he's like, "You need to get your shoes. We got to go. Okay. Let's go." And so we were rushing out of the house. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know. I could hear relatives down various hallways of my grandmother's home, a lot of crying and a lot of wailing and rosaries, different prayers and things being chanted and said, and just lots of noise and chaos. And
you had a sense that something was wrong.
Yes, I knew something was wrong. Yes, something was wrong. Something had happened. My grandmother's home was on the 24th floor, and so we, my uncle and my aunt, they were brother and sister. They dragged me out of the house and into the elevator and down to the curb, and there was a taxi waiting. And I remember my uncle saying, "Just get us there. I don't care how you do it. Drive on the sidewalks, go through the lights, whatever you got to do. We got to get there."
Wow.
And so, your heart rate, you're what is going on? And everyone is speaking Spanish. And yes, I understand a lot. And but it's just so chaotic. My brain was not really
tracking.
It wasn't tracking. And so I was sitting in the middle between my aunt holding her cross and saying the prayers, and my uncle was just freaking out, saying lots of stuff. And so I was the one that they took from the house. And so I started to put two and two together. This has something to do with me. And this, so that would mean it probably had to do something with my father, or my father's family. Something has happened that I was the one that they drug along on this car ride. And wow, it was a scary car ride. Yeah. And the closer we got to the suburbs and the industrial side of Medellin, the area is called El Poblado, and a lot of different businesses. My father owned a car dealership, and his car dealership was located in El Poblado. And so as we're approaching his building, I'm like, okay, this is about me. This is about my father. This, it's starting to sink in that something has happened. And there's a lot of ambulance, police cars, a lot of military clad, a lot of people in camo holding machine guns, a lot of guns. Yeah. And as we're approaching, I'm like, holy cow, something's gone down. And here we go. I remember opening the door and jumping out, and there was a trail of blood. And I noticed it right away, and it was in the parking lot, and it led into the building to the showroom where the cars would sit in the showroom of the dealership. And then it turned right and went over to the edge of the building, and then up the stairs where the offices, the executive offices and the secretaries and stuff were up above the showroom. And so I just remember following the trail of blood across the floor, up the stairs, through the first office, through the second office, and into my father's office. And beyond the blood, there were people standing around, people with cameras, folks that I assumed were detectives and various things like that, and police and lots of guns still. And so of course I'm like, oh, okay, where's my dad? So like I'm pushing through people and pushing through offices and like, where's my dad? And when we got into his office, hold on, I gotta take a drink of water.
That's okay, you're doing great. So just start with when we got into the office.
Yes, when I got into the office, my father's chair was turned over. It was on its side, and he was laying on the ground. His body looked fine, but you knew he was not. So he had been shot in the back of the head 6 times. And so it was an execution style killing. And I was hyper focused on the fact that his gun was still on his hip. And I was like, he didn't protect himself. Like he didn't even attempt, you know? Yeah. And then I started noticing like his Rolex was gone and a couple of his rings, you know? And I was angry. Like I was just soaking all the details and, you know, my aunt was sitting beside him on one side, and I had gone down on my knees on the other side, and we were both holding his hands, and my aunt was just crying, telling him to wake up, and you know, and I was saying similar things, you know, like no, why, and you know, the typical. And in my head, I was like, I shouldn't be able to touch his body. Like, this is a crime scene. Yeah. Like, you know, I'm thinking of movies that I watch in the United States. Like, I shouldn't be in here. Like, we should not be in here. Like, how are you going to catch his killers if
I touch everything?
If we're sitting here and you know, disturbing the crime scene. That was something that I was, you know, really focusing on, and then different thoughts, like when we looked around the room, you know, of course there were the policemen and the different detectives standing around taking down notes. I remember them writing down things and stuff, and I looked across the room where there had been a phone on a small table, and the phone was on the ground, and next to the small table, well, down the wall was blood, and like blood had been smeared down the wall. And it was like, what on earth? Because my dad's body's across the room. What has happened here? And then they explained it to me that a secretary had come in during all the commotion and the killing. So she had gone across the room, picked up the phone to call for help, and then they had shot her. So when the authorities had arrived, she was still alive. So the blood that I had trailed in, that I had followed the path, that was her blood, because they had taken her by ambulance. And she did later die at the hospital. But that was the trail, because, you know, it didn't make any sense. What trail of blood was I following? Well, now, you know, it started to make sense. I can remember trying to call my mom, because my mom, you know, my mom and I are besties. Like, I talk to her almost on a daily basis.
Well, you need somebody for you, too. Like somebody to
absolutely. And someone from my world, because I was always being inserted into their world every time I would go down and down to Colombia, and I needed somebody from my world. Yeah, absolutely. That's right. So trying to find a phone to call my mom, and back then, you know, it was a little more challenging to dial out of the country and stuff. And
I still feel like I don't know how to do it. So
So, well, fortunately, cell phones make it a lot easier. But so I can remember the only phone that I could get to work in the offices, I was standing over my dad, like standing over his body and calling my mom at work. And here she is at work, and at that time, she worked for the phone company. And so she was in like a room with over 100 different people in cubicles, and they're all on the phones helping people with their phones, right? And it's because she works for the phone company. And so I can remember talking, saying, "Mom, he's gone, he's dead." And so she screams, and of course she says that like everybody stopped working, like what on earth had happened, And so she said, I'm headed to the airport, I'm coming, I'll be there. And so that was a relief. My mom was on her way. She was going to be here.
A bit of a flight.
Yes, yes, because we lived in West Palm Beach at the time, and so she had to get to Miami and then get a flight from Miami to Medellin, Colombia.
Wow.
And so yes, it was a flight. It was going to take her several hours, and so I remember sitting there, after I talked to her, I felt a little bit of relief knowing that she was coming. But yet I was sitting by his body going like, why? Like, why did you do this? And not that it was his fault, but...
Right. But in the moment.
Yeah, but in the moment, you're like, how did you get yourself killed? That was what I was thinking. Yeah. And why didn't you protect yourself?
Right.
Because he had his gun.
Right.
And so I can remember relatives starting to say, "Okay, we got to go," and it was like, "Okay, well, what comes next?" Because prior with my grandmother, we did this and this and this, and we go and have the viewing, and so like, okay, where do we go now?
Yeah.
And so my aunt went with my father's body to help prepare it, and we went back to the apartment, and they're like, my relatives were like, "Okay, go get ready for the funeral." I'm like, "What? Like, wait a second, this is too fast." And I just kept asking why. Like, why are we going to a funeral so soon? Aren't we doing a viewing? Aren't we going to have relatives come in? Like, nobody knows. Because by then, a lot of the relatives that had come from out of town, they had left. And so it was like, okay, we got to gather people. And
you kind of thought you knew how funerals and death worked in that country. You just had gotten like a little tutorial.
Yes,
so
exactly.
You were like, okay, kind of know what to expect, and it wasn't.
And so they were like, "No, we're having his funeral this afternoon." And and then I had like so much anxiety, but also disbelief, because you do ask yourself, is this real? Is this really happening? Is this a dream? Am I going to wake up? And you think but then you don't know, right? And so I mean, we had his drive-by funeral is what I call it, because it was quickie. We went to the same cathedral that we had been there, 4 days prior for my abuelita, but there was just not hardly any people there. Like, the relatives that they could gather quickly were there, but that was it.
So different.
It was at like, the estimated time of death was somewhere like 8:30, somewhere in that neighborhood. And we were in the church before 2:00.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, as a 17-year-old, I was just argumentative.
Sure.
And I was like, his body's not even cold. Like, how can we bury him? He's not ready, and we're not ready. And my mom wasn't there. And that was a big thing for me, because I really wanted my mom to be able to say goodbye to him too.
Okay.
And so it was explained to me, like, I kept asking, and people were pushing me aside and not answering me. And I just over and over, like, why are we doing this so fast? What is the hurry? And why doesn't he get the same treatment that my abuelita got? And and finally, one of my uncles said, "Renita, if we do not do this fast, if we don't get him buried quickly, if we take time to mourn and grieve and gather in groups, they will come back and they will kill the whole family.
Oh, wow.
And so, because evidently those type of killings, if you took time to have a viewing and a mass and all of that, the folks, the people that,
had done it
mm-hmm. would come back and shoot everybody.
Okay.
And so, because we're talking, it was late 80s, it was 1989, it was, cartel, Colombian cartel, drugs, all of that. Mm-hmm. And it was a violent time back then.
Sure. There was a lot of fear, it sounds like.
Yes.
Just so much fear.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of fear. Something that was not a part of my world whatsoever. Yeah. And I mean, I knew, some of my relatives carried guns for protection. Like, I knew that, but mm-hmm. it really didn't sink in, the danger. Sure. And so, yeah, I mean, he was buried so fast and my head is spinning. Yeah. My mom gets into the country that night and it's just like, where do we go from here? Mm-hmm. Like, what do I do? Because I'm about to graduate and he was going to pay for college and I was going to get my car because he had promised me a car because he was a car dealer and, just a lot of things. And I'm also preoccupied with like, who did it? And are we going to go after him? Because that's me, let's get him. And, and what are the police doing? Like, what are they doing? Mm-hmm. And
so many questions.
Yeah. And a lot of it was swept under the rug because that was the culture. That is what they did. You don't ask questions. You just keep moving forward. Mm-hmm. And that was hard. That was hard in the moment. That was hard in the moment while I was down there surrounded by all the things. And so my mom and I stayed a few more days. I think it was almost a week after the funeral. And I had to get back to school because I wasn't the best student and I needed to get back to school. And so we did. We left and I remember a couple of different things. Being a Christian, I really called upon my faith quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And you ask a lot, like, why me, God? And, and why him? And why us? And, and who's going to take care of his family now? Like, because, I had my mom and I had my life in the U.S., but now his family is down there. And, and I had some guilt because I got to leave. Yeah. I got to leave. Yeah. I got to walk away. And they lived in it and had to, live it every day.
For them.
Yeah. And their lifestyle changed and, their provider, everything turned upside down on them.
Wow.
And so I had guilt, fear, there was fear because people were, is anyone going to come after any of the other relatives? Yeah. One of my uncles was not able to attend the mass for my father because they had to sneak him out of the country. And so because we didn't know who was another target. Yeah.
No, because you didn't know who and all that. Yeah. So just kind of so chaotic and fearful and like so much going on, so many moving parts to that. So what were things like for you after his passing?
So the night my mom dropped me back off at boarding school that night, I didn't tell you this story before, but it's something that I do share. I was upset. I was crying. I was back in the dorm, and I just, my life had turned upside down, and I didn't know how to be, And so my mom had left, and I was crying, and I was walking down the hall, and one of the girls' deans saw me, and she came up to me, and she said, "He is dirt in the ground. You need to get back to your studies, get back to your room, and get over it." And I just remember being appalled, like horrified. Like no one had talked to me like that. Like everybody was being sweet and, and this and that. And, I'm so sorry and apologetic and all that and sympathy. And this woman was not. It was the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. And so I had emotions of, how could you talk to me like that? Yeah. But then I was like, well, I could go back to, I can just go back to my room. And I mean, it was really rude of her to say that, he is dirt in the ground and, and all of that. Yeah. No, not the best. Yeah. But part of me was like, I do need to get back and buckle down and take care of me. And I had some anger over those words.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Yeah. I think there was like a lot of different ways to try to help you. But you used it.
Yeah, I used it. But that was, I remember a lot of friends, they were, like not knowing what to say to me. There was like walking on eggshells around me. And, do we talk about it? Do we not talk about it? And what did you see? Oh, you saw it, Okay. So it was a lot of, kids. Awkwardness. 17-year-olds. Yeah. And I had a boyfriend that was away at college already. And he... he told our friends up there and they were calling me and, and just, very sympathetic and stuff.
Mm-hmm. But a lot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the next few months were all wrapped around graduating and going to college and can I afford to go to college? And my dad that had actually raised me, which I refer to as my stepdad, just for clarity. So my dad that had raised me, he stepped forward and he's like, look, you're still mine and I'm going to pay for college and you're okay. And you're going to get through this. And that was a huge relief. Mm-hmm. And I still have a good relationship with him to this day. Yeah. And my kids call him Grandpa. But anyway,
you needed somebody to take one part of the situation, even just one, and stabilize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my world was still moving forward. I was still going to go to college. I didn't have a car, but that's okay. I was still going to go to college, and I just remember. It was pretty much sweeping everything under the rug. I didn't do it on purpose. It wasn't, I'm going to pretend it didn't happen. Like, you can't help it. Like, you can't help but think about it every day. Yeah. But I did emotionally sweep it under the rug.
Just kind of pack it away.
Yeah, I packed it away. Yeah. I didn't deal with it. Back then, counseling was not something a lot of people did. You had to be, off your rocker or whatever to do counseling. And it wasn't in my realm. Right. And it was not a thought, ooh, she should get to counseling. Yeah. And so I bounced around college. Oh my goodness. I was making a lot of poor choices, changing my major. I tell my students now, I changed my major like I changed clothes. Okay. And a lot of that is because I wasn't dealing with my underlying emotions and grief and stuff. And I connected with guys I shouldn't have. I was doing all kinds of things you do in college that I didn't believe in. So I was making a lot of poor choices. And
I think it's really hard to kind of be ambitious about your future when the past kind of has you by the ankles.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's a good description. Yeah, absolutely. And so I floundered in college for a couple years, dropping in, dropping out. I, tried nursing and then failed out and then, let me go home and I'll come back and be a nursing student again. And I was all over the place. And I remember I had come back and had just restarted the nursing program. And one of my cousins had come to me and she said, hey, I've been dealing with stuff from my childhood. I've got this good counselor. I really think that you need to see him. And I was like, oh, okay, what could it hurt, right? Like my life isn't, is a wreck, and I don't know what's coming and going, and sure, let me see what this counseling's all about. And so I started seeing this counselor, and he immediately diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress,
That seems really reasonable.
Yeah, so PTSD, and I wasn't really connected with all the terminology and everything at that point, but I can remember on the third visit, and by the time the third visit to my counselor happened, I was already really struggling in college, and I probably was not going to make it through the nursing program again. And so I go into counseling that day, and he says, look, I think what you are dealing with, we need to do it. We need to put you through a program that you can take it all out, unpack it, and deal with it.
And do only that.
And do only that. And this once a week thing is not going to work. It's going to take you too long, and the rest of your life is really affected right now. And he said, he's like, you have 3 days. I remember this. He's like, you have 3 days to drop out of school and pack your stuff up and get your life organized. And I'm sending you to Texas to a treatment center. And I'm like, what? Like I had never been to Texas.
You'd barely been to counseling.
Yes, barely been to counseling. And I wasn't doing drugs. So why are you sending me to treatment, right? Like, because at that point, I didn't know there was a difference of treatments. And so I can remember calling my mom. And saying, hey, Mom, I'm in counseling. And, oh, by the way, I'm dropping out again. And I'm going to Texas and checking myself into a treatment center. And I can remember being on the plane and thinking, I'm going to get to Texas, and there's going to be someone holding a card with my name on it. And I could walk right by them. Like, I could walk right by, and I could just disappear. And then, of course, like, reality hits. It's like, what are you going to do? Like, because that's not me. Like, that's not practical. I'm super practical. And
you really are.
Like, who do you think you are? You're not going to go disappear. You have too many, morals and ethics and all that, and you're too close to your family. So yeah. So I
guess I have to go.
I guess I have to go.
With the person with the card.
With the person with the card. Get in the car with a stranger. And, and of course, this was like a whole new culture, a whole new thing. Like, oh my goodness, what am I getting myself into? And
I think you mentioned you hadn't even been to Texas before.
No, never been to Texas. And it was very brown. And we were in the middle of nowhere. And in fact, the treatment center I went to was in a town called Hunt. Try finding that on the map.
I've been to Texas so many times, and I've never heard that.
No, you can't find Hunt, Texas on the map. And so it's that secret. Was, and I remember when I got there, because I'm like, treatment centers, like, how do I fit into a treatment center? But there was a BHU side, which I learned, behavioral health unit. That's where I was going. And I was surrounded by lots of other people dealing with their hard stuff. Hard stuff. And I resisted, but then I slowly started opening up and slowly started buying in to the whole treatment, and this could help me. But where I came from, you didn't talk about this stuff, right? Like, you didn't talk about the bad stuff or the poor choices you made, or,
your
feelings, and you have to unpack all this. And, and by the time it was parent weekend, like 3 weeks in, like, I had to tell my mom stuff she didn't know, and lots of hard stuff and of course she felt a lot of guilt because she didn't know. And, and so just working through all of the feels and all the things. And I tell my students now that I will think about all the traumas that I've been through, regardless of what they are. They're never going away.
Right.
But me stepping back, escaping life for a minute, and only having to deal with focusing on and how to absorb the grief and just being okay. I needed that time, and I've worked through it, and I did not want, like, one of the things I knew when I left there, like, I don't want this following me. Like, I didn't want the baggage. I knew the last 2 years had been chaos for me, coming in and out of college constantly. I say that they had a revolving door for me. I needed to surround myself with better friends and make better choices that I knew I believed in. And so this gave me a restart time. And leaving, now I had a chance to go become whatever I wanted. And
I love that.
I did not, because I'm stubborn and I'm strong-willed, that I did not want all of that dragging me down. You mentioned it had me by the ankle. Like it was, I did not want it affecting the rest of my life. And, and some people that I encountered along the way,
they seemed stuck.
And I had an aunt that was super stuck in her issues. And I was like, wow, I don't want to be that. I was 20. And I want to just move forward and not ignore it, because I unpacked it, I dealt with it, and I came to terms. And a lot of things that I had to do was I had to come to terms with the anger that I still had towards my dad, and I couldn't resolve that. I couldn't resolve it because he was gone. And so
you couldn't finish the conversation.
Exactly.
So
and that's hard. And so you just come to terms with that.
Acceptance is hard.
Acceptance. So, I tell my grief story quite a bit to one of the classes, the death and dying class at the university. And students will say, like, how do you move on, And my biggest thing for moving on was because I didn't want that grief to win. I didn't want the evil side, the bad side, the pain. Like, I didn't want it to get the best of me, because by George, I'm going to let something positive come out of my experience.
Absolutely.
And I can help others, I can help others move on, whatever their situation is. And I can help others with it. And I think that's where a lot of my a lot of my helping DNA comes from.
As how hard, difficult things can be, but you also know that it doesn't have to define the rest of your life. And I think that, so many times we want to be on the other side of things. We want to get the feeling that, you might have today about that situation, but you had to go through it. We don't get to go around or, or skip it. We have to go through.
Well, and, some of the things that were really challenging, like my relatives would call me, and they would cry on the phone a lot. And over my abuelita dying, my father dying, like this was years after. They would call, and I would get cards telling me that they had had a mass in the memory of my grandmother and my father, and my belief systems are different, and so it was really hard for me to listen to that over and over, and I was just like, look, those are not the way I believe, and so.
And you were ready for different conversations.
I was ready for different conversations. And so I did step back a little from my family for a while. I am connected to them now. I see them, I see them when they're in the States, or, I've been back to Colombia a few times, and that's very healing. And, and my siblings are grown now. And, so, it's different. Obviously, our paths have been different. But I feel that good I always feel like good can come out of any bad situation, and it's a learning opportunity.
And I think that you used yours to grow.
Yeah.
And, I think it's easy to think about, like, what would my life have been if I didn't go through this? But, we have what we have.
And I've had people ask me that.
Yeah.
Like, do you regret that choice or this choice that put you in that situation? Or do you wish, your dad hadn't been murdered? And, and it's like, I mean, I think that's a waste of time to put all your emotions into that. Like, I wish, sure, who wouldn't wish? But you know what? I take those experiences and I help others with it through the growth that I've had.
Absolutely.
And honestly, I wouldn't change it because I would be someone different. And I don't know that I would have had what it took to help others.
Yeah. I think it kind of, your story really gives a lot of foundation for why it's so easy for you not to give up on people who are struggling.
Yes.
Because that, it takes that big, brave step forward.
Right.
To get help, but that that healing can happen, growth can happen, and there's a lot of power in living a big life,
right.
alongside the things that happen to us. So what do you hope that listeners walk away with from hearing your story today?
Hope. Like there is sunshine. I had a friend that I was actually talking to on the way here, and she's been going through a lot of stuff, and she said, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train. And I'm like, that's
Yes.
awesome. That is an awesome description because, there is a light, and let others help you. And
Sometimes we have to borrow hope, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you needed your counselor to see you on the other side of it, and then kind of nudge you into taking that step.
Right.
And so sometimes we have to kind of cast the hope.
Well, and I think back, and it's like, how much faith did I have, and how I really feel like God had me, my angels had me, because holy cow, like I went to Texas knowing no one, and I put so much faith in the system, and and now as a parent, like I would be like, what? You're going to send my kid away? Like
I shall go to Texas as well.
Yes. Like that would be hard. But
it was really brave. It was really brave.
Wow.
And it sounds like it was what you needed. Well, I just want to thank you for being here, Renita. I always like our chats. And I'm just so grateful that you were willing to be brave and do the work so you can be here today, and I can know you and you can help so many. And I also want to thank our listeners for joining us for this episode. I know that many of you are listening and resonating with aspects of the story that you heard today. Or maybe your experience feels very different, but the emotions and difficulty feel familiar. I just want to encourage you to find those spaces where your own story can be held, and it can be given the support and love it deserves. Be gentle with yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to How Would You Rate Your Pain? Please subscribe on your favorite listening platform so you never miss an episode. And if this show made you think of someone, please share it with them to help us grow. I'm your host, Dr. Tiffany Bartell. You can find me on Instagram at the_happy_therapist_. This show is not intended as medical advice and should not take the place of therapy or other mental health services. Please consult with your doctor or mental health provider about your own health. You deserve all the support. How Would You Rate Your Pain is co-produced by WaveLength Studios and Chattanooga Podcast Studios and is part of the Podnuga Network. Graphic design provided by Josh Wilhem at JW Creates and music by Michael Crosa. I'm Dr. Tiffany Bartell. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time right here on How Would You Rate Your Pain?